Some of you that were here last week recognize we're doing an intense program for depression recovery. We always measure their EQ, or emotional intelligence, before and afterwards. And in 11 days, it can have a dramatic improvement. And those in the top percentiles of emotional intelligence will live a very successful and enjoyable life. And it's just one of those principles per se. There's 5 components of EQ: knowing our emotions, managing our emotions, recognizing emotions in others, managing relationships with others, and motivating ourselves to achieve our goals. And this is why it has a role in regards to leadership, because we want to be able to recognize emotions in others. We want to be able to manage relationships with others. We also want to have the motivation to achieve our goals. And the word emotion is the word motion, meaning that if the emotion is based on things that are true and accurate, it should powerfully motivate us into action. But it also involves knowing ourselves, at least our emotions, and those with high emotional intelligence manage those emotions. Those with low emotional intelligence are managed by their emotions. So a big question you can ask: are you being managed by your emotions, or are you managing those emotions? A key portion of emotional intelligence. There are other intelligence, however, that have been shown in studies to be associated with good leadership. One of them is called general intelligence. General intelligence involves IQ. In order to, those with above average IQs, it turns out, are the only ones who are truly creative, that can come up with something that is truly original but yet adaptive and helpful to others. And fortunately, IQ can be enhanced as well. In fact, I just gave a talk at the health school this week on the ways in which IQ can be enhanced, and told a story about an individual at an IQ of about 80 who paid attention to the principles I presented in that class and got up to an IQ of 120 and is now in medical school, and he barely made it through public high school prior to that. So IQ can be improved upon, and a lot of the principles that you are being maybe not taught but encouraged to live here at Weimar, hopefully you're being taught. But often when you come to the school, you see a different diet and you see a different, schedule and all of those things. You don't necessarily know why they're there, and they seem to be imposed upon you. But it turns out most of what is being imposed upon you is actually there to try to enhance your IQ and your EQ. You may not recognize it. And then once you get away from this place, you say, freedom, I can do what I want to do. And your IQ and EQ plummets in the year after you leave Weimar. And it's kind of like, wow, maybe that place was good for me after all the consequences of your lowered intelligence and your lower EQ catches up with you. But in reality, it's actually pretty good to live this lifestyle even when you're in a home setting. And then live it by choice, per se. So general intelligence is one of the things that can be enhanced here. In fact, that's something I would like to maybe encourage us in regards to studies. It would be a good study to look at the IQ of people that come to Weimar Academy when they come versus when they leave Weimar Academy. And then maybe study a year later to see how far it's dropped after they left Weimar Academy. Yeah, hopefully they've been encouraged to stay on the program so it continues to go up. But one of the things, if they come to Weimar College, then it can go up, of course. But one of the things that has been the enigma of the accredited, we're talking about getting regional accreditation here at Weimar. And one of the enigmas that just came up in the last regional accreditation summit that they had, may not have been the last one, but at least in the last year, was that regional accreditation took at the look of students as they entered into college in their ability to have disciplined, critical thinking. And there's ways that you can test this. And then they tested their critical thinking ability after they had graduated 4 years in an accredited, the highest form of accreditation that we can get, so-called in the world, the regional accreditation, to find out how much they had improved. Guess how much they had improved in the 4 years of these prestigious institutions that they were attending? 0 improvement. 0 improvement. And that means their IQ did not go up. That means their ability to reason through situations did not go up. Now, they learned what other men were teaching enough to be able to pass a test. But you know, true education is not just learning what others know. It's actually being able to think for yourself as well. And these people couldn't think for themselves any better than 4 years later. You'd think just by aging that might have helped a little bit. You know, there's more frontal lobe, for instance, structurally. After 4 years of college, they might have done a little better that way. But no improvement whatsoever. And in fact, the head of the accreditation authority said, our educational system is broken. And I could say more about that, but there might be accrediting authorities that are going to watch this afterwards, so I better be careful. But nonetheless, you know, much of what takes place in true education is going to improve. EQ and IQ. Social intelligence is the third aspect of intelligence that's associated with good leadership. What is social intelligence? Social intelligence has to do with social appropriateness, as well as being not just appropriate, but to be able to move a group in the right direction in a social setting. Now, this is yet a fourth intelligence. Personal intelligence is not general intelligence, emotional intelligence, or social intelligence. Personal intelligence has more to do with recognizing areas that you are not intelligent in. In other words, where your limitations are, and recognizing significantly where those limitations are. The fifth area is hot intelligence. Now, hot intelligence is gathering information and using it in direct personal relevance for well-being. You can have, you know, general intelligence is your capacity to learn, retain, and apply new knowledge. But hot intelligence has to do with present knowledge, and it has to do with your ability to accumulate it and use it in a directed way to improve the well-being of others. And it turns out all 5 of these are directly related to leadership ability. And so these are things that are, hopefully you are developing here at Weimar if we're going to meet the expectations of this institution. There are other leadership qualities, however, that have been identified across the board. Honesty is one of those. One of the things I've noticed about leaders who are not honest is they invariably don't last long at the institution that they're leading. Eventually, the effect of the dishonesty catches up with them. And then people recognize, wait, he said this, and then to this person, and then he did that, etc. Can't trust him. And so they move, often from place to place, pretty quickly. They might still get an administrative position, but it's not going to be an administrative position that necessarily lasts a long time. Reliability is one of those as well. If they say they're going to do something, they carry it out. Responsibility, if there are mistakes, they own up to it. And they take responsibility for that. And by the way, I have yet to find a leader among humanity that has been a leader for very long who hasn't made some mistakes. You know, even good leaders, like the one we're going to be discussing here, made some mistakes and then had responsibility in owning up to those mistakes. And then other leadership qualities, a transformational influence, where they are not only leading the organization forward, but being transformative in regards to the people that are there and the lives that they touch. Now, Abraham Lincoln, he's considered widely as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, U.S. president ever. He says, intoxicated with unbroken success, we have become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us. It has seemed to me fit and proper that God should be solemnly, reverently, and gratefully acknowledged, as with one heart and one voice by the whole American people. I do therefore invite my fellow citizens in every part of the United States, and also those who are at sea and those who are sojourning in foreign lands, to set apart and observe The last Thursday of November is a day of thanksgiving and praise to our beneficent Father who dwelleth in the heavens. Signed, Abe Lincoln, October 3, 1863, almost a year after he drafted the Emancipation Act. And that's why we have Thanksgiving every year. Prior to that, it was not a yearly event. We know it started with the Puritans, but that was a Thursday through Saturday, and then it ceased. There was one more Thanksgiving after the Revolutionary War was over with, that Washington proclaimed, and there was not another Thanksgiving until then, and then Abe Lincoln made it a yearly event, hoping that we would not forget God. Then the Civil War is still not ended, but it's starting to come to an end. It looked like it was pretty clear what would happen. And he's reelected now as president. And this is his inaugural address in March 1865. With malice toward what? None. Despite all of the misery and suffering and unnecessary deaths that occurred because of this holding on to slavery, he still didn't have malice. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. That was just a snippet, but it showed his spirit of love and compassion. And I'll end with these 4 character strengths that need cultivated for true leadership. Courage. Abraham Lincoln clearly had it. Strengths of courage entail the exercise of the will to accomplish goals in the face of opposition, either internal or external. There are 4 aspects to courage: bravery or valor, persistence, which means perseverance, industriousness, integrity is also a courage, where you have authenticity and honesty, and vitality is the 4th aspect to courage. I'd like to briefly go through these. First, bravery and valor. Courageous action must be voluntary. Coerced action does not qualify. So it's a voluntary action. In fact, another statement of Abe Lincoln, he said this: force is all-conquering, but its victories are short-lived. And so he recognizes coercion is not the way. Courageous action must be voluntary. Coerced action doesn't qualify as courageous. It must also involve judgment, an understanding of risk and acceptance of the consequences of action. Bravery requires the presence of danger, loss, risk, or potential injury. Without a sense of danger, risk, or vulnerability, there is no bravery in the act. So if you didn't recognize there was risk, don't call it a courageous act on your part. It's not courageous unless you recognize that there's risk and vulnerability. Bravery is valuable because it allows people to dampen their immediate response to danger and evaluate the appropriate course of action. It involves the mastery of fear rather than fearlessness. If you're fearless, that means you don't have insight. You don't have a frontal lobe is what it means. But courage and bravery is mastery of fear rather than fearlessness. Bravery is doing what is right, including confronting the status quo or opposing an unhealthy idea, and as such raises the moral and social conscience of a society. Being of service to others and acting toward a higher purpose can be bravery. And related to courage is that root word of courage, which is what? Encouragement, which refers literally to giving heart to another. So part of courage is that encouragement, the willingness to give heart to another. It comes from the book Character, Strengths, and Virtues. Bravery in the face of imminent death is not the equivalent of fearlessness, because fear is certainly experienced. Bravery is the ability to do what needs to be done despite fear. Doing the unpopular but correct thing. Facing a terminal illness with equanimity can be brave. Resisting peer pressure regarding a morally questionable shortcut is brave. Bravery it turns out in and of itself is fulfilling. And this is why leadership can indeed be fulfilling as well. We feel good when we do the right thing, whether standing up for justice or in the face of an angry group or standing up and saying what needs to be said despite knocking knees. When we act regardless of our fear, we are fulfilled. And the term heroic is actually a synonym for bravery. Elevation of others is invariably produced when we observe bravery or even just hear about it. The 9/11 heroes. It's encouraging and it helps us to hear about their bravery in the setting of 9/11 and Ground Zero. Signers of the Declaration of Independence. When we see what happened when they signed that and what happened to them physically and financially. Some of them lost their lives, tortured, etc. Jonathan and his armor bearer. What a story of bravery. He recognized there was risk. Gideon and his band of 300. Another story of bravery. Desmond Doss and other Medal of Honor winners. What a story of bravery. But the opposite of bravery is too common today. What's the opposite of it? Cowardice, spinelessness, and that can lead to paralyzing anxieties. Pontius Pilate is an example of the opposite of bravery. Failure to intervene in an emergency is lack of bravery. And sometimes we call this pluralistic ignorance. Pluralistic ignorance is relying on the inaction of others to encode a circumstance as not requiring action. So since others aren't acting, we say, well, I don't really need to act. No one else really seems to notice that this is an issue. And thus it grows. Pluralistic ignorance, which is failure to intervene in an emergency. This might be an excuse when matters are truly ambiguous, but it's not really a true excuse. When we know what needs to be done but refrain out of fear, we are not ignorant, but we're cowardly. Moses was an example of a true leader. He had his men step into the Red Sea and keep going, relying upon the Lord, even before it divided. Abraham Lincoln not only articulated truth and asked that it be adopted, he finally acted upon that truth alone, and then the Lord blessed. And so that's one of the things we need to understand. You know, Weimar articulates a lot of truth. We espouse the truth of the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. But just talking about the truth and trying to persuade others to follow the truth is not enough. We need to sometimes act out in faith alone and follow the truth. And then the Lord can bless, as he did Abraham Lincoln. The second is persistence, sometimes called perseverance. Industriousness is another term. Finishing what one has started, keeping on despite obstacles. Taking care of business is another term for it, or achieving closure. Staying on task, getting it off the desk and out the door. Persistence, when sustained activity results from an internal strength as opposed to threats or deadlines, it's highly engaging. I had a more serious conversation with my son Justin a few weeks ago. Justin is just 9 years old. Is he here tonight? Yep, he is there. Okay. Well, I was talking to Justin. At the time, I called it drive. You know, sometimes you have to have a drive that seems to be internal. It's one of the things that I admire about the character strength of my wife. She's got this drive and this persistence in getting the task done. And it happened to do with an area of Justin's life that was lacking in drive. He might be able to tell you afterwards. I don't know if he'll feel comfortable or not telling it to you. But I don't want to expose all of him tonight. But we gave examples of drive. And of course, persistence sometimes is difficult when there's all sorts of other distractions around. And there's other things that can be done. And so it's one of those difficult character strengths that is connected to leadership. And after the conversation, as the conversation was happening, I was beeped to go to the emergency room to take care of someone's internal bleeding. And so I had to leave maybe a little prematurely. But he had tears running down his face at the conversation, and I wasn't sure what those tears were about. And I asked him what the tears were about. He didn't want to tell me what they were about. And I left. And then when I came back, Erica told me that he did not like the word drive. And she said, "That's okay. Let's call it persistence." And so when the activity is complete, it produces satisfaction. We admire the busy bee, the ant. We admire the tortoise, but not the hare, and the little engine that could. The opposite of persistence, however, is laziness, sloth, giving up, not trying, losing heart, losing interest, taking shortcuts, cutting corners, going for the quick fix, vacillation, and often it's called helpless. But really, it's not helpless per se. It's called that. Sometimes people are helpless. They don't persevere at a difficult task, even when effort would be rewarded. Thomas Edison is an example of persistence. Do you know how many times he tried substances before hitting on the carbonized cotton thread as a useful filament for the electric light bulb? Not just 100 times, not just 1,000 times, 6,000 times. He was the one that said genius is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. Abraham Lincoln lost 6 elections. I didn't go through all of them. Failed in 2 businesses. Experienced severe depression. By the way, just a few weeks before this picture right here, Abraham Lincoln lost his 2nd son in the White House to death. So, I mean, he was, in fact, if you look at this picture, if you come up afterwards and look at it, you'll see the symbol of his own mourning of his own son that he carried with him, because he was still in the midst of mourning his son. Jacob, what was his persistent act? Does anyone remember? That was one of them. Yeah, working for Rachel. One of the ways in which you can know later on whether you're ready for marriage or not is whether you're willing to work 14 years for your woman before you marry her. Jacob worked 7 years and then worked another 7 after that. But yeah, that was a persistent act. But there was something even more persistent than that he's known for. Wrestling with the angel. Even after his hip was broken and dislocated, he continued to hold on until the Lord blessed him. What was Elijah's persistence? Praying for rain. How many times did he fervently pray? 7 times. And we're told had he stopped at 6, it would not have rained. Ellen White. By the way, one of the things I would encourage you to do, it's actually a fun thing to do. It's enjoyable. And I can tell you, if it's enjoyable for a 9-year-old to read something like this, it's enjoyable for every one of you here. But Erica, for the evening stories, for Justin before he goes to bed, has been reading the biography of Ellen White. And I can tell you, on nights when we're so busy, when we can't read that, he gets tears in his eyes again. I want to read about Ellen White. Because the stories, they're very interesting. You see the context of what she was dealing with, and you see her dealing with people with distorted thoughts and mob mentality and all those type of things. And it's a story of persistence and bravery, many of these leadership qualities. Amen. It's exciting. And it's better than any novel that you might pick up at any store, and it can give you a lot of perspective. In fact, you want to do well in Dr. Moore's church history class? That's a big secret right there. Integrity, truthfulness, honesty, taking responsibility for how one feels and what one does. So I'm going to encourage each of you to be a true leader. Improve your IQ. Enhance your EQ. Improve your SI. What was SI? Not Sports Illustrated. That can deter your social intelligence. But yeah, SI is social intelligence. Improve your PI. Personal intelligence. Good, you were listening. Develop your ability for HI. Hot intelligence. Good. Have that future-mindedness. Have that ability to overcome loss and go from disappointment to appointment. Having that spirit of graciousness and gratitude. Having courage, bravery, persistence, integrity. And then finally, that transformational influence. Now, in case you're wondering, I haven't arrived at all of those true leadership qualities. I'm working to improve those character strengths. But I can tell you this. You take hold of these character strengths, and it's not an if whether you're going to be a great leader. You will be a great leader. There's people in this auditorium tonight that will take this message to heart and become great leaders for the cause of God, who will be put in the Hall of Fame in the books of heaven. Amen. And everyone who is a true leader in the end of time, in that way, is going to be called a member of the 144,000. There's not going to be just one or two or those type of great leaders. There are going to be 144,000 of them. And they will indeed be transformational. But to apply it a little more closely to Weimar, I have one more story to tell and one more attribute to being a true leader, particularly a leader that is a member of the 144,000. And it has to do with what happened just a few weeks before I gave this talk this last year. There was a man who had leadership qualities like this that I learned from as a student. It wasn't called health back then, but I took a short training course when I was actually a physician in my residency at Wildwood Lifestyle Center and Hospital. And the man who was teaching me a couple of times a day, in fact, there were just a few of us students. We didn't have 18 health students back then. There were like 3 of us. But yet he took his time out of his schedule to give us didactic and wonderful talks on science as well as inspiration. His name was Dr. Baldwin. He had actually taught at Loma Linda for years in the School of Health, a neurophysiologist that still stayed up with neurophysiology. But he died last year, and he was on his deathbed. He still had a sound mind. He could barely speak. He was dying from a blood-related disease in which he was having to have transfusion after transfusion, and finally said, "No more transfusions. Let me go." He was at peace. He was assured with God's salvation. He had everything ready. And he said, "I'm ready to go." And in many ways, he reminded me of my own father. My father had many of those strengths of leadership. He was a leadership in a secular organization, a chief engineer at General Motors, but also led out in local church functions, head elder, etc., but had many of those character strengths, if not all of them. My own father had died 10 years earlier, and had died so suddenly I was not able to hear his last words to me. And I knew with a man of counsel and wisdom that he would have something to say. In fact, he would have gathered all 5 of us around on his deathbed and given us the instruction. There were 5 kids that he had. I was number 5. Given us the instruction. And all of us have talked how we missed that. It happened so suddenly, he didn't even know he was going. And we missed the opportunity for his last words. I was over in the Ukraine when he first started to get sick from Legionnaire's disease that took his life very, very quickly. And I told Burnell, I said, in many ways you remind me of my own father, the love and the intelligence and the objectivity. But I said I never was able to hear the last words of counsel from my father. You know you're dying. You're talking to me now. What are your last words of counsel? Why he happened to be talking to me is there was a one except. He had everything ready except. And there was one thing that he wanted to be sure would go forward in a positive way. And the individual that could help him go forward with that in the positive way, he thought was Dr. DeRose. And he could not get in touch with Dr. DeRose, so he had to get in touch with me to get in touch with Dr. DeRose. So that's how I had a chance to talk to him. On the last day, he talked with me. If you want to know what that was, I guess you can talk to Dr. DeRose later. I don't think he's here tonight, but I'm sure you'll be able to see him around campus. And what he said was, my last words of counsel to you, Neil, is to study the books. What did he mean? The Spirit of Prophecy books. And follow the books. And I will see you in the morning. And so the last words for you to be a true leader, study those books. Follow them. And we will see each other in the morning.
Hello, I'm Dr. David DeRose. You know, helping a friend, neighbor, or relative have better health is one of the most practical forms of health ministry available. However, if you're not a health professional, it can be extremely difficult to know how to help someone access reliable, credible, up-to-date health information. That's why I recommend the New Start Lifestyle Club. The club is based on the world-famous New Start principles that have helped millions be well naturally without the use of drugs. The club offers streaming video, expert health advice, wellness tips, tools, and more. And when it comes to ministry, the New Start Lifestyle Club provides a way for sponsored churches and health organizations to connect with club members in their own communities. If you'd like to learn more about how the New Start Lifestyle Club can make a difference in your health outreach, call 1-800-525-9192 and ask for your free copy of Health Evangelism Made Simple.